There are few things in life more jarring than waking up to goats screaming in harmony with Vivaldi's Four Seasons. For a second I thought I was dying, or hallucinating, until I opened the barn door and saw 30 wine glasses hovering over a satin-draped table, fairy lights tangled around my hay hooks, and Karen Buchanan, our freshly re-elected HOA president, barking at a man on a ladder. "No, Harold, the vintage lighting needs to look rustic, not tragic," she snapped as if that cleared up anything. That's when I knew. Today wasn't just going to be irritating. It was going to be war. It all started 3 weeks earlier when the county redrew the zoning lines, and my quiet 12-acre slice of paradise, complete with chickens, goats, and a lovingly restored barn, got swallowed up by the Whispering Cedars HOA. I didn't want it, didn't ask for it, and sure as hell didn't appreciate the welcome packet that came with lawn care rules and coupons for tanning salons. Still, I figured I'd keep my head down and ride it out. That was before Karen won her 3rd term as HOA president. Unopposed because no one else wanted to babysit a bunch of manicured lawns and fragile egos. Karen, the kind of woman who wore stilettos to potlucks and once called the cops on kids running a lemonade stand, had declared my barn perfect for her next HOA event, a rustic wine-tasting soiree that she claimed would blend rural charm with upscale flair. Translation: she needed a free venue that looked authentic in Instagram photos. I told her no. 3 times. Firm. Clear. Civil. In response, she pulled a laminated HOA bylaw sheet from that leather bag she treats like a holy relic and pointed to something called subsection 14b, which, according to her, authorized temporary communal use of suitable private structures for neighborhood events. It read like it had been translated into English by a confused AI, but Karen recited it like scripture. Next thing I knew, a team of HOA volunteers was hauling my feed bags outside, replacing them with barrel tables, and draping the rafters with eucalyptus garlands. Now, I'm not prone to dramatics. I served in the military. I've seen real battles. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the sight of Karen attempting to relocate my goats because their bleating conflicted with the flute solo. She moved them to the side pen, where they promptly destroyed her dried fruit centerpiece and chewed through her curtain rod. Karen shrieked like someone had set fire to her yoga mat. My goats just looked at her, burped, and went about their day. Her daughter Madison was live-streaming the chaos on some app I'd never heard of, twirling around in a prairie core dress and chirping, "We're setting up this, like, raw wine experience in this adorable old barn we found. It's giving Pinterest meets pioneer realness." I tried correcting her, but Karen shushed me like I was interrupting a sacred ritual. That's when I noticed they'd turned my antique butter churn into a ring light stand and converted my farm sink into a DIY mimosa bar. The final insult came when Bryce, the self-declared sommelier, liquid storyteller, showed up. He wore a scarf indoors, sniffed the air like he was judging cheese and said, "We'll need to mask the animal smells. Maybe incense? A lavender diffuser?" I asked him if he knew we were standing in an actual barn. He blinked and told me, "Scent is a portal to memory." I offered to let the goats headbutt him into one. That night, after the last case of overpriced wine had been shoved into my barn's walk-in cooler, I stood there in the doorway staring at what used to be my sanctuary. Now it looked like a discount wedding exploded inside a crate and barrel. My tools were dumped in a corner, my feed buckets were missing, and my goats looked traumatized. One was chewing on a paper lantern like it owed her money. Karen brushed past me carrying a wine crate, barely sparing me a glance. "Don't worry, old-timer. We'll clean it up after the event. Unless the goats destroy something expensive. Then we might need to talk about restitution." She vanished into the fairy lights like the villain in a Hallmark horror movie. I didn't respond. I just smiled. Because right then, something ancient and deeply petty inside me stirred awake. I wasn't going to argue bylaws or quote zoning codes. Karen had brought the HOA circus into my barn, and I was going to give her a show she'd never forget. And I knew just who to call. My nephew Brad, high school chemistry teacher by day, amateur special effects wizard by night. Showtime was about to begin. As the proud owner of several industrial-sized jugs of vinegar, I knew we had 3 days until the event, plenty of time to mix up a little revenge cocktail. On my way back to the house, I passed my favorite goat, Jolene. She gave me a look that said she, too, had seen enough of Karen's nonsense. I gave her a scratch behind the ears and said, "Don't worry, girl. We're gonna fix this." Right on cue, she let out a thunderous burp just as Karen's daughter Madison pranced by, live-streaming to her followers. Madison shrieked, tripped, and dropped her phone into a rainwater trough. A sign, I thought. The barn was ready. So was I. By sunrise the next morning, I was ankle-deep in vinegar and knee-deep in plotting. The barn still reeked of whatever synthetic spray Karen used to mask the scent of actual animals, and one of my goats had chewed through a table runner that probably cost more than my entire utility bill. As I sipped my coffee and surveyed the disaster, fairy lights twinkling like a rejected bachelor set, I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed Brad. He answered with a sleepy grunt. No pleasantries. Just family. How do you feel about turning wine night into a science project? I asked. Brad laughed before I could even explain. That's the thing about kin, you only need half a sentence. He was already throwing on a hoodie and grabbing his keys. By mid-morning he pulled into the driveway in his dusty Subaru, the trunk stuffed with enough sketchy bottles and chemicals to get us flagged by Homeland Security. He popped it open with a magician's flourish. You want red or white sabotage? He grinned. Because I brought both. We started in the garage with a taste test, not for enjoyment obviously but for science. We had to match the color and consistency of Karen's precious wine list. Brad had even printed fake labels to match her actual inventory, Chateau d'Neut, Whispering Glen, Sauvignon de blah blah, the usual overpriced nonsense. The reds? Mostly apple cider vinegar with a splash of beet juice for that deep, broody hue. The whites? Goat milk, thin just enough and chilled to mimic that crisp, refreshing nonsense Karen always bragged about. For the dessert wines we added a syrupy twist to the milk, just sweet enough to be disgusting. And for extra flair, we included a bottle of pure pickle juice, labeled Brut Traditionnel. That night, while the HOA's inner circle was presumably off steaming their matching blazers, Brad and I snuck into the barn. Karen had stored the real wine in the walk-in cooler, perfectly labeled, meticulously stacked. We moved fast. One by one we drained the real wine into a bucket lined with garbage bags, then replaced each bottle with our signature blends. Brad resealed and heat-gunned every cork like a pro. The labels? Flawless. Not a soul on earth could tell the difference, at least not until the first sip. After 2 hours the switch was complete. We stashed the real wine in my root cellar, insurance in case Karen came at us with accusations. Brad asked to keep a few bottles for his collection. I told him he could, but only if he promised to drink one every time he was stuck in a faculty meeting. With the wine handled, we initiated goat protocol. Now my goats aren't just cute, they're clever. Jolene especially has a talent for opening latches. So Brad rigged a simple release mechanism on the barn door. Open it just the right way and the latch on the side pen would pop. The goats would flood into the barn like furry wrecking balls. We positioned them near the dessert wine station. Goats love sugar. It wasn't science. It was instinct. To make things even better, I strapped an old GoPro to Jolene's harness, an experiment from when I tried to enter her in the county fair goat races. She hated running but she tolerated the camera. The plan? Capture the chaos from the goat's perspective. Spilled wine, screaming guests and Karen's inevitable meltdown, all in glorious 1080p. As we packed up that night, Brad stood in the center of the barn, surrounded by barrel tables, fake grapevines and lace bunting, and shook his head like a proud stage director. This is going to be beautiful, he whispered, like we were about to premiere a Shakespearean tragedy. The morning of the event was suspiciously calm. Too calm. Karen arrived first, flanked by her 3 lavender-blazered minions, clucking over wine glass placement and the order of the tasting stations. Bryce, the sommelier, liquid storyteller, showed up next wearing a new scarf that looked like it had been knit out of passive aggression. He started polishing glasses while humming something operatic and pretentious. Karen stalked around with her clipboard like a dictator inspecting troops. I kept my distance, pretending to patch a fence just outside the barn. Every time she looked my way, I gave her a cheerful little salute. She ignored me. Good. The less she suspected, the better. The sweeter the reveal, the more delicious the chaos. By noon, the guests began to arrive, HOA members, local realtors, 2 overly proud town council members, and even a food blogger from the next county over. It was a parade of wide-brimmed hats, pastel suits and forced smiles. Someone brought a drone to capture aerial ambience, which buzzed overhead like a judgmental mosquito. At the center of it all stood Karen, wine glass in hand, posing like a discount Martha Stewart. Today is not just about wine, she announced, her voice theatrical. It's about community, refinement, and celebrating the spirit of Whispering Cedars. Polite applause. Flashes from phones. I grinned from the barn door shadows. Showtime. The first round of tastings began. Brad and I stayed tucked out of view, just close enough to hear the whispers start. Bold? One guest murmured uncertainly. Very earthy, someone else offered. A woman near the back took a sip, gagged quietly and whispered, "Is this off?" Karen didn't flinch. She waved a manicured hand and said breezily, "It's a rare varietal. A challenging profile." But when the goat milk wines hit the table, the illusion began to crack. One man coughed so violently he dropped his glass. A woman dabbed at her tongue with a linen napkin and declared, "That's not Chardonnay. That's dairy." Karen's smile twitched. Bryce, the ever-suffering scarf-wrapped sommelier, took a generous sip, paused and mumbled, "Unexpected creaminess." I was nearly in tears from holding in my laughter. Then it happened. A guest near the dessert wine station, desperate for fresh air, tugged on the side door, the one we rigged. The latch popped. Goat protocol initiated. The pen flew open, and the goats stormed in like a fluffy, horned cavalry. Jolene led the charge, head held high, her GoPro harness bouncing as she bounded into battle. They trampled centerpieces, shattered a pyramid of wine glasses, and one even dove hoofs first into a cheese platter like a conquering hero. People screamed. Wine spilled. Karen shrieked, "The goats! Who let out the goats?" Beside me, Brad whispered, eyes wide with awe, "This is better than prom." I just nodded, arms crossed, as Karen slipped in a puddle of goat milk and crashed to the floor, Bryce's scarf trailing after her like a fallen banner of defeat. And the best part? Jolene's GoPro was still rolling. From the moment she burst through that door, the scene unraveled like a slow-motion disaster film. The music cut off. Guests froze, mid-sip, watching in disbelief as Jolene launched herself onto the gift table, sending a basket of whispering cedars, branded corkscrews into the air like confetti. Karen was the first to move, screaming incoherently, arms flailing like she was trying to herd chickens in a hurricane. One goat, Merrill Sheep, mistook her sequin shawl for a snack and lunged. Karen spun to dodge, slipped again and crashed backward into a folding table. 3 bottles of goat milk wine soared into the air like dairy grenades and exploded on impact, dousing guests and soaking Karen in her own sticky spectacle. There was no escape. In every direction, goats. Jolene, proud and unbothered, climbed atop the dessert bar and began devouring a tiered cake made entirely of brie. 2 younger goats dragged floral centerpieces across the barn like battle trophies. A man tried to pull his wife toward the exit, only for them both to trip on Madison's Livestream ring lights, crashing into a mess of cables and shattered glass. Bryce stood in the center, cradling a wine bottle like a lifeline. He took another sip, frowned and muttered, "This isn't even fermented," before staggering dazed toward the cooler, muttering something about recalibrating his palate. And Madison? She was already filming. Her phone screen was cracked, but her influencer instincts kicked in fast. "Guys," she whispered breathlessly to the camera, "we are in the middle of the worst wine-tasting disaster in HOA history. This is like if Napa Valley got attacked by livestock." Her shaky footage caught Karen, dripping in goat milk and cheese shrapnel, guests clawing toward the side window, and Bryce weeping softly in the corner. The view count skyrocketed. Thousands of comments rolled in, cry laugh emojis, OMG replies, and demands to release the full video. Then, as if summoned by divine timing, one of the goats discovered the decorative fruit table. It headbutted the watermelon centerpiece, which exploded in a juicy pink spray across half the barn. And the drone? It was still lazily circling above until a goat reared up and headbutted it mid-flight. It spiraled down like a fallen angel, crashing into the wine display with a slow, syrupy splat. A river of sour goat milk and vinegar snaked across the barn floor, flowing toward the front entrance like even it was trying to escape. Karen, soaked, streaked with mascara, one heel broken, rose shakily to her feet and bellowed, "Stop the event. This is not authorized behavior. Someone call security." There was, of course, no security. Karen had insisted that rural authenticity didn't require supervision. In that moment, her expression shifted from fury to something deeper. The slow, painful realization that she had orchestrated the very disaster now imploding around her. I stepped forward from the shadows by the door, clapping slowly. Heads turned. Silence fell. I didn't speak at first. I just walked in, hands behind my back, boots splashing through the sticky chaos. The goats calmed as I passed, recognizing me. Jolene even trotted beside me like a loyal sidekick. It was pure theater, and I made sure every step burned into Karen's memory. She pointed a trembling, cheese-covered finger at me. You did this. You sabotaged us. I'm calling the board. I'll have your property seized. I'll sue you for damages." I raised an eyebrow. "Damages from your unauthorized use of my barn? Or the mental distress you caused my goats?" There were murmurs. Phones recording. Karen's face twitched as she realized she wasn't just being watched by the guests, but by the internet. Desperate, she turned to the crowd. Everyone, please don't listen to this man. He's clearly unstable. And this isn't his barn anymore, it's shared community space. He signed the bylaws. I smiled, pulling a printed page from my pocket. Section 14B, the same clause she once used against me. I read it aloud word for word. Temporary communal use of suitable private structures, with prior written consent from the property owner. I paused. Which I never gave. In fact, I sent an objection via email, time-stamped. Want to see it? Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Bryce groaned from a corner, still cradling a wine bottle like it owed him rent. Madison's phone dinged, another livestream platform offering to monetize the chaos. And then, perfect timing, a goat loudly pooped on Karen's clipboard. She screamed like glass shattering and stormed toward the exit, only to slip one last time and fall face-first into a pile of party favors. The guests didn't follow. Most were too stunned. Some were too sticky. A few were just thoroughly entertained. I gave a casual wave to anyone who met my eyes and said, "Y'all are welcome to stay for some real cheese. It's not brie stacked into a cake, but it won't fight back either." That evening, with the barn finally quiet and the sun dipping low, Brad and I sat in my kitchen watching the GoPro footage from Jolene's harness. From her point of view, the chaos unfolded like a cinematic masterpiece, charging into the barn like a knight in fuzzy armor, capturing Karen's downfall with perfect framing. "It's award-worthy," Brad said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. We posted a short, anonymous clip online titled "When Wine Meets Boing." Within an hour it had over 50,000 views. Comments poured in. "This is art. Release the goat cut." Karen got curdled. Later, as moonlight spilled over the fields, I sat on the porch with a real glass of wine, none of that sour nonsense, and clinked it against Brad's. The goats rested peacefully in their pen, no longer confined like some afterthought. They'd earned their freedom. The barn still glittered faintly with party debris, and a trail of spilled goat milk shimmered in the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but from justice. Not from fines or letters or fake apologies, but from hooves, chaos, and a plan perfectly executed. And the best part? Tomorrow's HOA emergency meeting was going to be even better. Karen droned on about community values and the supposed dangers of unsanctioned agricultural environments, like my goats were part of some rogue militia. When she accused me of deliberate sabotage of HOA property, the room collectively hummed with disbelief. Someone in the back coughed the word barn, and a ripple of laughter spread like wildfire. I waited until she was nearly finished before standing, not with drama, just calm, deliberate steps to the front. I handed the HOA secretary a neatly labeled folder. Inside, timestamps of every email I'd sent rejecting the barn's use, a notarized statement about the unauthorized entry and, most importantly, a printed copy of the HOA bylaws with the relevant clauses highlighted in bright yellow. Karen's face went pale as the secretary flipped through the pages, her lips pursing tighter with every turn. Then I handed over the USB stick. "If anyone would like to see exactly what happened during the wine tasting," I said, "I've got a goat's eye view, from the moment they broke in to the last wine bottle bursting on the floor." Karen opened her mouth to interrupt, but it was too late. The secretary plugged in the drive, the lights dimmed, and Jolene's footage filled the projector screen. There it was, pure chaos, captured in glorious goat vision. Karen flailing. Guests screaming. Milk and vinegar spraying like confetti. And finally, the piece de resistance. Karen slipping, crashing straight into her own cheeseboard, goat hooves clattering around her like a war drum solo. The room erupted in laughter. Even the most uptight board members couldn't hold back. The only one not amused was Karen, whose face was now redder than the Cabernet she tried to serve. When the lights came back on, I turned to face the crowd. "Look, I didn't want to fight," I said. "I just wanted to be left alone to run my little farm in peace. I never asked to be in the HOA. I certainly never invited anyone into my barn. I was mocked, trespassed on, and my animals were treated like decorations. So I responded the only way I knew how, with a little creativity, and a lot of vinegar." For a moment the room was still. Then came applause. Real applause. Not the polite HOA-mandated kind, but the kind that comes from people who've been waiting years to see someone stand up to the Queen of Petty. Someone in the front row even whistled. The secretary stood and cleared her throat. "Based on this evidence," she said, "Karen has clearly violated multiple HOA codes, including unauthorized use of private property and endangering livestock. She is suspended from her position as president, effective immediately, pending a formal vote. Karen tried to push back, something about a prank, a smear campaign being the true victim, but the room had turned. Madison slipped out quietly, probably already drafting her apology video. For the first time in her iron grip on the HOA, Karen had no power left. And then, something unexpected happened. The video, originally uploaded just to stir the pot, caught fire. Not just locally. A popular internet news channel picked it up, the kind that thrives on suburban meltdowns and goat-fueled justice. Comments poured in. People called Jolene a hero. Artists started drawing fan art of her in a cape. A t-shirt design went viral, sour grapes. Sweet justice. With a cartoon goat stomping a wine glass. Brad ordered 5. He started calling Jolene Commander Chaos. Then came the email, from a quirky but rising production company that specialized in offbeat reality TV. They loved the story, the visuals, the chaotic brilliance of the revenge. They wanted to meet. Their pitch? A show called Barnstormed, featuring clever rural comebacks against suburban nonsense. It sounded ridiculous, and kind of fun. I told them, maybe. Meanwhile, the barn was restored to its former glory. The wine stains mostly scrubbed clean, the goats happy again. I even got a check from the HOA to cover damages, more generous than expected. Turns out, some of the new board members wanted to bury the whole thing and start fresh. Soon I began hosting small get-togethers. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors, some real cheese, maybe a replay of the infamous goat cam video. People brought snacks. Asked to meet Jolene. Helped repaint the barn door. One man, a retired dentist, offered to make a wooden sign for the barn. Read, Goat Gallop Winery, where the tasting notes are explosive. I let him. As for Karen? She moved 2 towns over. Word is she started a new HOA in a gated community with stricter rules and absolutely no livestock. I wish them luck. They're going to need it. One quiet evening, I sat on my porch with Jolene curled beside me, her head resting on my knee. I raised a glass of actual wine, good wine this time, and watched the sun set over the barn, now peaceful, glowing in the golden light. The chaos was behind us. Mostly. Because when Brad called that night and said, the production company wants a pilot episode, I looked down at Jolene and smiled. Looks like it's time for one more adventure. The end.